Good day and welcome to the Table Styles in Word, an overview of how to use and create table styles to define and standardize the appearance of your table, hosted by Julie McCarthy. My name is Sally and I am your event manager. During the presentation, your lines will remain on listen only. If you need assistance at any time, please key *0 on your telephone and a coordinator will be happy to assist you. You may submit web questions throughout the presentation by clicking on the Q&A tab. Type your question and send to all panelists. These will be addressed in the Q&A session. I'd like to advise all parties this conference is being recorded, and I'd now like to hand over to Julie. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Julie McCarthy. I am a lead consultant at Ticket Limited, and I am a committee member of the Document Excellence Group. Thank you for joining me today to look at table styles. I'd also like to thank Ticket for hosting the event for us as well, and at the end of the webinar we will have an opportunity to answer some questions. I expect this webinar to last around half an hour with, as I say, opportunities at the end for any questions that you have around table styles. Now, we all use styles in Word documents to format paragraphs and headings in order to maintain format consistency throughout documents and to work in line with our firm's house styles and formatting. However, a majority of documents nowadays contain tables, and sometimes this format consistency is not maintained throughout our documents. You can therefore use table styles to ensure all tables in documents are uniform. When you create a table style, you can specify which formatting is applied to different parts of the table, such as header, footer rows, left and right columns, body rows. And a table style is a collection of table formatting attributes, such as table borders, shading, font formatting that can be applied in one single step. Word has a number of inbuilt table styles for you to use, and these can be modified if required. You can also create your own table styles, and if you add these to a template, they will be available throughout. You can also set a table style as a default, and we're going to look at all of this throughout this webinar. Now, the first thing we're going to cover is using the inbuilt styles that come with Word for tables. So I have a document here that has been set up as a health and safety policy, and I've got quite a few sets of tables throughout this document. Normally what happens is when you're working in a standard document and you create a style, Word will apply its default table grid style. Now generally, if I wanted to check what style has been used throughout a document, majority of it, if it's a paragraph style, if I wanted to see what style was on this number 1 heading here, statement of intent, I would tend to go to the Home tab, turn on my Styles pane, and it would tell me down the right-hand side of my Styles pane what style has been applied. But if I do this within a table, if I click in my first table that I have here, I can't actually see at this stage what table style has been applied. As I click in each cell, it would tell me what paragraph style is being used, but not what table style. So from the Styles pane, if I did wanted to double check what table style had been applied, I could go into my Manage Styles button at the bottom, and in the Edit tab here, it tells me the table grid style has been applied, and I would have the option at this point to modify it. But I'm going to cancel that because this style pane generally tends to be used for paragraph styles and character styles. When we work with tables in Word, we have 2 tabs that we can specifically use to change not only the layout but also the design and look and feel of our table. So we have the Layout tab here that comes under the Table Tools. And that's where we could go to insert rows, columns, delete rows, columns. But it's the Design tab that we're going to be looking at in this session. So in the Design tab, I have the Table Style Gallery. So the first thing I can see in the gallery is that one of these table styles has a thicker grey border around the outside, and that's the one that's currently being used on my first table. If I hover the mouse over it, it tells me the name of that inbuilt style, Table Grid. But I have quite a few other choices of table styles that I can go for. And as I hover over each one of them, I start to get a preview of how it's going to change my table. There is a More button, so I can click on More, and it opens up even more choices for me to pick from. I can hover over them, and again, I can see a little bit about how my table is being affected. But if I want to see more, I can just drag this box up, and again, I can hover over each table style to see what one I like the look of. Now, these inbuilt styles can be modified, and you can also change the default style that gets used. So if you don't want to use table grid, but there was another particular style inbuilt that you liked, you could make that your default. Now I'm going to change the style that I'm using for this first table. So I'm going to make sure it's one under the table grid section. Towards the bottom, I'm going to use this one here. So each inbuilt style has a name. This one is called the Grid Table 6 Colourful Accent 1. I've hovered over it, quite like the look of it, but I want to make some changes. I'm going to click onto it first so that it applies the formatting for me to my table. I've got some banded row colours there. My first column is coming out in bold. But there are other changes that I would like to make to this style. So this table style, when I use it again throughout this document, I would like the first column to not only be in bold, but I'd like it to be bigger, size 14. I'd like the first column to be shaded in blue. And I'd like my banded shading not to be blue, but I'd like it to be orange. And I want to change the borders as well. Single lines throughout, but a nice thick border around the outside. So I want to modify the formatting that this style is applying for me. So I can see again what style I've used because it has the thick grey border around the outside of it. And if I right click on the style, from here I have the choice to create a new table style, modify this one, delete it if I don't want it at all within this document, or I can set it as a default. So I am going to modify this table style, and it brings up the Modify Style properties box for me. First of all, at the top, I can see the name of the style. I can see what type of style it is, table, and I can see that it was first created. It was based on a style, a table style called Table Normal. Probably the most important part of this box when you're modifying table styles is this Apply Formatting to here. When you click on the drop-down arrow, you can be very specific about what part of the table you want to change the formatting of. Do you want to change the format of the heading row, the total row, the first, the last column? Do you want to change the formatting of your banded rows and columns? You've even got the option down the bottom to change the format of the top left cell, the bottom right cell. So the first thing we do before we ever change any type of formatting is we come into the Apply Formatting, drop down, and we choose what we want to affect first. So I'm going to start off with whole table in here, and the first thing I want to do is make sure that for the whole table, I'm using Calibri body 11, which I'm quite happy with, but I don't want my text to be blue. I want it to be black. So I'm going to change my text color here for black. And as I'm amending from here, I should start to see in the preview what it's going to look like. I also want to change my first column because a lot of my headings are in the first column of this table. So they are in bold, but I want them to be bigger, and I want the whole of the first column to be shaded in blue. So I'm going to go back to Apply Formatting and select First Column. So I have bold on already. I am going to increase to size 14, and I would like the first column to be shaded in blue. So I'm going to choose a light blue shading here. And again, I can see the changes applying to the first column. I want to make sure as well that my odd banded rows are shaded in a very light orange. So I'm going to click on my drop down here, and I'm going to look at the odd banded rows. Now they currently have a fill colour of light blue, so I'm going to change these to a light orange instead. if I look at the preview, it looks like my columns, my odd columns, have shading on them as well, my banded ones. So I'm going to change that to not have any shading on. So I'm going to go to odd banded columns here and say no colour on that one. So I can start to see how my table is going to look if I save these changes. One last thing I want to do with the formatting with regards to the bold is, by the looks of it, my last column at the moment is in bold. So I'm going to just come back here and I'm going to change my last column so that it isn't in bold. So far I'm quite happy with the formatting. One last thing that I want to change, and that's my borders. So I want to have single borders inside the table, but a nice thick border around the outside. Now I do find when I'm working with borders in a table style, when you use these buttons, sometimes the preview doesn't come up straight away, and you might have to do it a couple of times before you can actually see what you're going to get when it comes to borders. So I prefer, when I'm changing my borders, not to use the buttons, but to go into the format button down the bottom and go into borders and shading and change my borders from here. Now, when I've come to change my borders, my apply to here says cell. I'm going to cancel that because my apply formatting to was set to last column. I want to make sure that when I change the borders, it affects my whole table. So I am going to change this first to whole table, and then I'm going to come back into format, borders and shading. So I can see a slight preview here. At the moment, I have these very pale blue borders inside and outside. So the first thing I want is a nice thick black border around the outside of my table. So I'm going to keep the line style to a single line. I'm going to change the colour to black, and I'm going to make it a thicker line. I'm going to go for 3 points. And when I do that in my preview, I can see at this stage it's affected everything, all the borders inside and out. So I want to keep the outside ones, but I'm going to turn off the inside ones for the moment. I'm going to click in the middle here to switch them off. And I'm going to set up what I want the inside borders to do. So again, I want a thin line, black. I don't want the width to be quite as big, so I'm going to go for ½ a point. And I'm going to click back in the middle so that it affects my inside lines. So I can see a preview now of what I'm going to get, a thick border around the outside and thin inside. And when I click on OK, again, I should start to see in a preview now what my end result is going to look like for my table. So if I want to see how that's going to affect my table now, I'm going to click on OK, and it now applies all that formatting to the table for me. I could make my first column a little bit wider at that point because I have made my first column of text size 14. There's just one other change that I want to do to this table. So I'm quite happy with the look of it now, but I don't want a gap between my first border and my text here of name, address 1, address 2. And also what I would like is a little bit more padding between each row in the table as well. So I'm going to go back and make some more changes to this table. So again, when I look in my table styles gallery here, I can check what one I've just amended because again, it's the one with the thick grey border around the outside. The name hasn't changed, it's still Table Grid 6 Colourful, which is the inbuilt style, although I've modified it. And I'm going to right click and I'm going to modify again. I don't want to change any of the formatting with regards to colour or bold and borders, but I do want to remove that gap from the beginning of the cells in each column. And also I would like a little bit more padding, a little bit more space between each row. So I'm going to go into the format button again. Now most things that are in format we do have as buttons. So font, you've got your buttons here for bold, italic, size, colour. Banded, if I want to change anything to do with the banded shading, I can choose apply formatting to, choose the correct banding, odd or even, whether it's rows or columns. and change the format. And I did go into borders and shading when I was changing my borders. But right at the top, I have table properties. Now, within table properties, you've got a series of tabs. Some tabs you might click on and you can't make any changes. For instance, the column tab, for me at the moment, the options are greyed out. In the table tab, though, I can decide to change the alignment of whether the table sits on the left-hand side of the page, whether it's centred or on the right-hand side. I'm going to change this to centre. And on the table tab as well, when I go into options, I have here my cell margins. And my left-hand side of each cell, there is a slight margin, so I am getting a slight gap. And I'm just going to, for this table style here, I'm going to remove that left-hand gap. The other thing that I can also change in here is row. So if it was a table where I had some headings in the top row, I could turn on repeat as header row if I wanted to. As a default, when we create tables in Word, Word allows rows to break across pages. But again, dependent on the tables that you're working on, you may want to change your style to say, I don't want to allow tables to break across pages, but I'm going to keep that ticked for this one. I'm going to click on OK. The last thing I want to change in here is spacing before and after paragraphs. So I have a little bit of a gap between each row. So I'm going to go back into Format, Paragraph this time, and I have my spacing before and after. And I'm going to have a slight gap of 3 points before the text that's in each row and after the text. And I'm going to keep it to single line spacing. Again, I'm going to click on OK, and I did see a slight change in my preview there. In order to see this on the actual table itself in the document, I'm going to click on OK. So now I don't have any spacing between my first column, my first border here and my text. And I've also got now a bit of padding between each row because I've got that space before and after set to 3. So if I want this table to look exactly the same as my first one, I can click in here now, go back to my table styles and click on the More button, and this grid table 6 colourful has now changed with all the formatting that I've modified. So if I now click on here, it automatically applies exactly the same format. So throughout this document, I know that every time I use that style, I'm going to get the same look and the same feel. But for this document only, if I wanted it to appear in several documents, then I would have to save that in a template. And if I work off of that template, I know that table style is going to appear exactly the same each time. And we do that towards the end of the session. The other thing that you can also do when you are using your applying a table style, again in the Design tab, is not only modify the style and apply that throughout, but sometimes there might be certain tables where you don't want to apply certain formatting too. So for instance, on this second table here, I might think, oh, I don't really know if I need banded rows. I've only got 2 rows. I don't really want one white and one orange. So when you apply a table style, you have at the beginning of the Style tab these set of table style options here. And it tells you at the moment if there's any part of this table which has got different formatting assigned. So it's had my banded rows are switched on, my first column is looking different. If I turn banded rows off for this table, then it just turns off that colour shading, so it all becomes just one standard colour. It doesn't affect in any way the actual style that I've used. If I used it again further down in the document, it would go back to this standard formatting. But just for this table, I've said I don't want to use the banding. Now, sometimes you might look at your tables, for instance, something like this table here, where I've got some headings at the top, and you might have a look at all the inbuilt table styles that come with Word, and you might think, I don't really like any of them for this particular one. I want to create my own. So you can create your own table styles. Again, if you were to put them into a template, those table styles will be in every document that is based on that template. If you put it just within a document, then it's going to be just for that document only. So we're going to have a look at creating a new table style now. Now I want to create a table style that's going to apply my firm's formatting. So I would look at my firm's standard format. What do we go for? So I'm going to say, right, for my firm, we have 3 colours that we tend to use, blue, white and grey. Our default font is Arial. We tend to not really have banding in our tables. And as a default, I would like to have a double outside border on all the tables that I use and a thin inside border as well. So I want to be able to create a table style that's going to apply in one single action those set of formats for me. So in order to create a new table style, you do have to be in a table. So I'm going to click in this table here. Up in our design tab, we have our default table styles, and if we click on the More button, right at the very bottom, we have the option to create a new table style. And if we click on here, we get exactly the same dialog box pop up that appeared when I modified one of the inbuilt styles. So the first thing I would do is give my table style a name. I want it to be a table style, and I have the choice to base it on another table style if I want to start with a little bit more formatting than what's showing at the moment. So the first thing I'm going to do is name this style. I'm going to call it Julie Firm Table. I don't want to change the fact that it is going to be a table style that I'm creating. But as you can see at the moment in the preview, it's not actually starting with anything. I've got no borders, there's no shading, there's nothing to start with at all. So I am going to change the style that I'm going to base my format on. Rather than table normal, which just starts off with a blank canvas, I'm going to click on the drop-down arrow here, and I'm going to go right just to the very top. These are all the inbuilt styles that come with Word. But right at the very top, I'm just going to say, start me off with the table grid light, which just means I've got something to start with. I've got some borders, and then I'm going to build it up from here. So when we changed the inbuilt style before, I was saying that one of the most important parts of this dialog box is apply formatting to, and it's exactly the same for when you're creating your own style. What parts of the table do you want to change, and what format do you want to happen? So I'm going to start with whole table first of all, because I would like to say whenever I use my own style, I want the format to be Arial, size 11. I want the colour to be black. I'll just make sure it's going to pick the black up here, which it is. I also want to make sure that I have a nice double border around the outside of the table and a thin border inside. So while I've still got whole table selected, I'm going to go and change my borders. And as I say, you could use the buttons. I just prefer, I find it much easier, me personally, to go into Format, Borders and Shading, and just change my borders from here. So I'm going to go for the double border first of all, go for the colour black, make it a little bit thicker, and as it did before, it changes all of my borders. So I'm then just going to turn off the inside ones and just go back to a thin border, just a slight, again black, just a very thin width of ½ point, and just put that in the inside. So when I click on OK, I can start to see this change. The tables that I'm going to be using for this format are all going to have a header row. So I want to make sure that my header row will always come out in bold, size 14 and shaded blue. So I'm going to change my apply to here so that it's going to change the header row. And I'm going to make sure that I have got size 14, bold, and just a light shade of blue in that top row. I don't want any banded shading on any of the rows or any of the columns. So I will just double check if I go into odd banded rows. There was a light shading that I couldn't see in the preview. So sometimes even if you can't see it, it's worth just coming into some of these apply formatting options and just checking. So I want to make sure that my odd banded rows have no colour shading on them. I'm going to check the even. That's fine, no colour. I'm going to do the same with the banded. Just make sure that my banded columns for odd and even are also set to no colour. So just double check when you are applying formatting and just check to see if there's anything there that you don't want. The other thing I'm going to do as well is make sure that whenever I use this table, like I did with the other one, I'm going to change some of the properties. I want to make sure that I don't have a cell margin on the left-hand side. And when I use these table styles, it will centre the table in the middle of the page. So I'm going to go into Format, Table Properties, and under Table, I'm going to centre it. And in Options, I'm going to make sure that I have no banding in there. And I'm going to click on OK. Now I'm just going to change that again because I did notice there that I was applying the formatting to banded columns. So let me just change that to the whole table. And again, just check that, make sure it's centered. And in Options, I'm going to make sure the 0 for the left-hand side. And then I'm going to OK that. So if I want to see this format applied to my table now, I click on OK. And first of all, I get nothing. And that's because I created it as a whole new style. So I need to go and find where my new style is. So if I go back to my Design tab and I click on the More button, any styles that you create, any new styles, will appear under this Custom area at the top. So there's my Julie Firm table. And if I click on there now, it automatically applies that style for me. So again, I could go down to another table further on, and if I want to use that style again, I can click on my style to apply it. And again, if there was any amendments that I wanted to make, if I thought actually I would quite like to have a bit of padding between each rows, that's where I could right-click now. I could modify my table style, and in Format, Paragraph, I could start to make more changes. So sometimes you may find when you create your own table styles, you might do your first one and then you might apply it and then you might think, actually, I don't like the look of that. I'd like to change that. So it may take several modify attempts to get the exact version that you want. But if you're happy with that version, you then could right-click on your table style and you could set it as a default. So if I was to set mine as a default now, it comes up with this little box and it says, do you want to default for this document only or for all documents based on the normal template? So if I was just ever going to create a blank document from now on and I chose the bottom one, then my style would become the default table style whenever I insert it. I'm going to say I just want to do it for this document only. I'm going to click on OK. So what would happen now, if I go to the end of this document and I think, oh, I'd like another table, I go into Insert and I insert a table, it will automatically now use my style every time, but for this document only. So I could have as many tables as I like from now on, and that within this document becomes my default table style. Now, you may find that you really like this style and you want to use it throughout the rest of your documents. So you could create a template based off of what you've done here so that your table style, whenever you created a document based on that template, would be used throughout. So I'm going to turn this into a template. I'm going to say that I don't actually want my template at this stage to contain any text, any tables, but I want it to have my default table style that I've just set up. So So I'm going to highlight the whole document and just delete the content. So I've got nothing in it at the moment, but if I were to insert a table, it would automatically come out as my default style. So I'm going to save this as a template. I'm going to put it onto my desktop for today. So I'm going to go into File, Save As. I'm going to browse for an area, a location, and I'm going to put it onto the desktop. And I'm going to call it Julie Table Template. Underneath that, I'm going to save it as a Word template. Whenever you save, just be careful if ever you do this, because whenever you save a Word document as a template, it automatically changes the location. Even though I selected desktop, it's now going to change the location for me. So I'm just going to retell it, I want it to go onto my desktop. And if I save that now, that should go onto my desktop. So I'm going to close Word down. And I'm going to go on to my desktop. And hopefully on my desktop, I should have my Julie Table template, this one here. If ever I want to create a document based on that, I can double click. It's going to create a nice document, which is going to be blank for me to use, but it should contain my table style. So if I go into Insert, Table, and I start to insert tables now, they automatically will come out with that format, that look and feel of my company's default settings. Okay, so just recap on what we've done in this training session. So when we're inserting tables and you click within a table, we were saying that you have your two tabs at the top, Design, Layout. Design is where all the inbuilt table styles are, and when we click on our More button, we can choose a different inbuilt style. But if we have been setting up our own, they will always be at the very top in Custom. And if you have that in a template, you could have a whole series of different custom table styles that you've set up for different table scenarios that you might be working with. We can modify by right-clicking, and we can set a default one. So if you find that the table grid style really isn't the one for you because you're constantly changing, every time you insert a table, you're constantly changing that look and feel, then have a look at modifying one of the tables, create your own, and set that as your default. Generally, when we set as a default, it tends to just be for the document that you're working in. But if you have a template open and you do this, and you create a document based on that template, then those documents will automatically have it. As you saw within this session, I just put mine into a template that I put onto my desktop, and I just sort of created it from there. When working with documents that contain a lot of tables, I would say this is one of the best ways to format them. Don't just have to think every time I insert a table, I've got to keep reformatting it. I've got to spend half an hour changing it. Just spend a little bit of time either creating your own or modifying one of the inbuilt table styles. And then from then on, you can just use those as your default. So thank you for attending this webinar. And I'd like to put it out now to see if we have any questions that I can answer for you. And also, I will just give you towards the end of the session as well, ways that you can contact me afterwards through Document Excellence Group, should you have any questions about table styles after the webinar today as well.
Okay, so if you'd like to ask a question, please key star, then 1 on your telephone, record your name. If you then decide to withdraw your question, simply key star 2. All questions will be answered in the order received, and you'll be advised when to ask your question. Alternatively, you may submit a question on the WebEx. To do this, click on the Q&A tab, type your question, and click Send to all panelists. So just to remind you, if you'd like to ask a question, please key star, then 1 on your telephone.
I'll just see if we've got any questions on the WebEx.
a couple of questions on the WebEx. The first one says, can I do the same for tables in PowerPoint?
I believe you can, yes. So when you're in PowerPoint, if I just bring up my PowerPoint screen here, and I insert a table, I could just create a new slide in here. Let me just go into a title-only slide. Yep, so I don't know if you can see here, but I've just inserted a table within this slide here, and we have the design and the layout tab identical to what we have in Word. We've got the table styles here, so you can right-click on those. You can set them as your default. The only thing is you're not as a little bit limited in here, so you can apply styles, you can set them as your default. You don't have the option though in here to create a new style, and also when I right click I don't have the option to modify. So you have some of the functionality, whereas you can insert the styles, you can apply table styles, you can set them as a default, but you just don't have that extra part of being able to modify them or create your own.
Okay, the next question says, this isn't a question. That was brilliant. Really, really helpful. Thank you, Julie.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Next one. I joined late. Apologies. Will this webinar be posted on website for review later? Thank you.
It will be. Yeah. Yeah, we will put a copy of it on the Document Excellence Group website.
Okay, we've had nothing come through on the telephone, so just to remind you, if you'd like to ask a question, please key star then one on your telephone. And we've got another question come through. Many thanks. Can you tell us how to best manage more than one table style in a firm template? I would like to create 3 options within our existing normal template. Would they appear as custom in the table menu?
They would. So any styles that you create in Word, so if you're in a document and you create more than one style, when you go into design, you click on more here, you will have a whole series of them here. So you can have more than one, but the only thing that you can't have is more than one default. So you can have sort of a whole series of different created styles, table styles that you've set up. And the one that is going to be more popular or more used than the others is the one that you could right-click on and make your default. But other people would then be able to, if they've got access to that template, that document, would be able to come here and would be able to pick from the other created custom styles that you have set up. So you can definitely have more than one custom style in a document.
Okay, we've had one question coming over the telephone now. It comes from the line of Elaine Easterling. Please go ahead. You're live in the call.
Oh, sorry. Can you show me a table with heading numbering, how you would deal with that if you had different levels?
I mean, I would tend to, if you have your, hopefully you'd have your inbuilt styles to do that,
yes,
your
exactly.
paragraph styles, like I've got here. So, you know, if I did have sort of paragraph styles here, I could quite easily just use them within my table to apply numbering to it as well if I wanted to.
Okay, thank you.
You just need your paragraph style set up with your numbering.
I just wondered if you could adjust, say, the second level to indent. Can you modify it that way?
What if I wanted this 1.1
Yeah.
to be indented within this cell?
Yeah.
I could go into the table styles there. If, for instance, this one here, if I modify my table style, it depends what column. I suppose if I go for I've got mine in the first column here. So you do have things like, I mean, it depends. I probably, rather than put it on the actual cell itself, I think I would personally put it onto the number here, because I could put it onto the cell, but then what happens is I might want to use a different number on a different cell, and I might not want that to be indented. So I would tend to say, like this A is indented here, but I've actually done it within the numbering scheme itself. So when I set my numbering scheme up, would have gone into my list, my multi-list level here, and actually set up a numbered list. I called it main numbering here. So for me, if I wanted the 1.1 to be indented under numbering, I would set up the indent here and just push that in a little bit so that when I use it in a cell, it automatically indents the number. So I would tend to use the table style more for the look and feel of the actual table itself, but with regards to numbering, I would set up a set of numbering styles and sort of set all the indents up within that area.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We've got no more questions on the telephone and no more questions on the WebEx.
Oh, that's great. So just to sort of finish off, I'm just going to bring up this one, just to say that if anyone has got any questions after this, if you email us at info@excellence.com, I can get back to you, answer any questions after our session, and we will have a recording of this on our Document Excellence website, which is www.excellence.com. So you will be able to review this afterwards. But thank you all for attending the webinar this afternoon.
Thank you. That concludes your conference call for today. You may now disconnect. Thank you for joining and have a good day.